This is my daughter in our first car.
Those were the good days.
At the time at Lejeune.
It was the life of a Marine's wife. Antoinette Scott and her family lived on Camp Lejeune in Jacksonville, North Carolina for much of the 1970s and early 80s.
Base housing was very nice. We always thought the Marines would take care of us.
But at 67, Antoinette now says they've done anything but.
I have to do a vitamin, and I have to do a stimulation.
Today, Antoinette starts her mornings with a regimen of pills. In 2011, she was diagnosed with stage 4 thyroid cancer. She beat the disease. She still feels the effects.
3 inches of my esophagus was taken away and my lymph nodes. This is why I'm talking the way I do now.
It was an illness she says she never could have avoided because it was caused by something no human can live without.
We made Kool-Aid with the water. We played in the swimming pool with the water. We were covered by it.
What she didn't know was the water at Lejeune was contaminated for 3+ decades. The federal government now acknowledges the chemicals caused everything from cancer to Parkinson's disease.
Marines let us down. The base let us down.
Antoinette's medical bills were covered by her ex-husband's military insurance, but Antoinette says many people's claims were denied, although Congress has voted over the years to expand more benefits. What makes this even more difficult is that North Carolina had a strict statute of limitations for lawsuits against the government. Even when that state law was changed, it wasn't retroactive, which means Antoinette and other families still couldn't pursue legal action.
That's just unfair. If Camp Lejeune was in any other state, they would have long since had relief.
Democrat Representative David Price and Republican Representative Greg Murphy of North Carolina are co-sponsors of the Camp Lejeune Justice Act, which aims to fix that issue. The bill recently passed the House as part of larger legislation aimed at military toxic exposure.
I think it gives them their day in court.
The CDC estimates nearly 1 million people may have been exposed to the contaminated drinking water. Is this legislation going to open the floodgates for lawsuits in the thousands?
It could be a substantial number. It will not break the federal government. By any means.
Republicans Tom Tillis and Richard Burr of North Carolina are sponsoring the Camp Lejeune Justice Act in the Senate. That chamber still needs to vote on the toxic exposure bill. This is a rare sight. Republican and a Democrat sitting beside each other. What does it say that there is some bipartisan work happening on this issue?
This isn't a Republican or Democratic issue. We believe in bringing justice to the people who were inappropriately damaged.
Nothing brings members of a state delegation together like back home concerns.
That's my little boy at 5 months.
4 decades since Antoinette lived at Lejeune, she's still dealing with the effects. She blames the water for her daughter's struggle with infertility. And as for Antoinette's cancer, doctors think a form of it might be back.
If you hear my voice, then keep it in your head. Senators, even the president, get out there and do something for us.
A sliver of justice may come through legislation, but it's by no means justice achieved. In Washington, Reuben Jones, Spectrum News 1. In Wednesday night's Republican Senate primary debate, the candidates were asked, would they support the nominee if it wasn't them? Former Governor Pat McCrory and former Congressman Mark Walker said yes. Political newcomer Marjorie Eastman gave a more incomplete response.
Is that a yes or a no?
I believe in Conservative Party.
With Congressman Ted Budd leading in the polls, Eastman pointed to a specific vote by him that she says should be a disqualifier. Budd declined an invitation to the debate.
He recently voted against legislation that extends health care benefits to veterans who are suffering from toxins and burn pits. That tells me 2 things. Bad judgment or he doesn't care.
It's true that he voted against a bill that would do that. But Bud's campaign says that's not the full story. Eastman, a veteran who trails significantly in the polls and in fundraising, is talking about legislation called Honoring Our Pact Act. It would expand health care to veterans suffering cancers and other illnesses caused by exposure to toxins while they served. Inside the legislation is another bill called the Camp Lejeune Justice Act, which would allow people sickened by contaminated water at Camp Lejeune to sue the government. That bill was actually co-sponsored by Bud. But the two bills were tied together, and Bud's campaign says the legislation had little to no input from Republicans and that it, quote, did not streamline the process of getting our veterans the health care they need. So he voted no on the PACT Act. However, 34 Republicans joined with Democrats in supporting the combined legislation. Two of those Republicans represent North Carolina. Representative Greg Murphy told us why in an interview last month.
This isn't a Republican or Democratic issue. We believe in bringing justice to the people who were inappropriately damaged.
The legislation now heads to the Senate, where changes may have to be made for it to pass. Bud's campaign says he supports a separate bipartisan Senate bill that, in his view, is the fastest way to getting veterans the care they need. Mike Partain has no memory of this photo. He was just an infant. But it was a period of time that shaped his childhood and adulthood.
It has changed my life.
In the late 1960s, Partain was conceived and born at Camp Lejeune in North Carolina. While he was only there for a short time, it was long enough to fall victim to Lejeune'S hidden toxin.
My mother drank the water, bathed in the water, came in contact with that water.
His mother had no idea the water was contaminated for 3+ decades at Lejeune. The federal government now acknowledges the chemicals caused everything from Parkinson's disease to cancer.
I have never been more scared in my life than when the doctor came in and says, I'm afraid you have cancer.
Partain was diagnosed with male breast cancer 15 years ago. For a person at his age, it is extremely rare, and a doctor told him toxins like those in the water at Camp Lejeune have been linked to cancers like his. But for years, Partain and other people who've gotten sick were barred from taking legal action against the government for the harm the water caused. Now, legislation in Congress could change that.
Let's have our day in court.
The PACT Act, with a price tag of more than $200 billion, focuses on veterans and other people who've been exposed to toxic substances, including from burn pits. It passed the Senate Thursday 84-14. North Carolina Senators Thom Tillis and Richard Burr voted against the bill. The legislation, if signed, will likely lead to thousands of lawsuits against the government over Lejeune.
We're not asking for a free handout. I mean, my case may go before the court, and then the jury comes back and says, sorry, there's nothing here for you. I can accept that because that's what the due process that's written into the Constitution guarantees me as a citizen, and that's all I'm asking for.
Partain, who's now cancer-free but still has numerous medical issues, says it's long overdue.
Without an accountability, the behavior is going to continue.
Giving a new meaning to that photo of a young Partain, where hidden in the corner is the contaminated water that would scar his life. In Washington, Reuben Jones, Spectrum News 1.